Okay, we will get started. I would like to call the school board meeting for Tuesday, October 20th, 2020 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Please take the roll.
Mr. Barron,
Here.
Ms. Bradley,
Here.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Here.
Mr. Cody,
Here.
Ms. Della Gardell, Ms. Martirano,
Here.
Ms. Sawyer.
Here.
I want to welcome all members of our community to our board meeting. We thank all guests, board members, and participants in advance for keeping their microphones muted until it is the appropriate time to speak. If you are interested in speaking to an agenda item, please contact Aaron Jenkins at aaron.jenkins@dmschools.org. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Sawyer, so moved. Caldwell Johnson, second.
We have a motion by Sawyer and a second by Caldwell Johnson. Please vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for September 21st, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
I move approval.
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
We have a motion by Mr. Barron and a second by Caldwell Johnson. Please vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of minutes for September 30th, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Please vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on our agenda is approval of the minutes for October 6, 2020. May I have a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
Move approval.
Second,
Cody.
We have a motion by Mr. Barry and Mr. Barron and a second by Mr. Cody. Please vote.
Sorry, Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. The next item on the agenda is the consent items. We allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak to an agenda item, please put something in the chat to Ms. Jenkins. Remarks must be germane to the agenda, and we ask that you avoid reference to personalities and character attacks, as those types of comments serve no productive purpose. We appreciate your input. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with the speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing said discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Caldwell Johnson, I believe you have the consent motion.
Recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $3,142,672.37, and procurement card transactions in the amount of $394,672.37.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Mr. Barron. Any discussions or questions?
Madam Chair, I did have just a quick question. I have received several emails from individuals regarding the item on the stadium project. And I mentioned to the superintendent earlier today that just for the purpose of clarification, I thought it would be helpful to respond to the two questions that I've received. The first is, with the litigation pending on the stadium, why are we proceeding with plans to excavate and grade? And then the second part of that question is, given the litigation, what are the risks associated with this action?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if you all recall, after many months of deliberation, the board on July 7th, the board approved a design services contract for a little north of $815,000, and also approved a 2080 agreement with Drake University. And after that, about 3 weeks after that, on July 30th, the lawsuit was filed. So we had already formally established the agreement with Drake and had already approved the expenditure of over $800,000. On August 17th and September 15th, the board approved architecture payments relative to that contract of a little over $48,000 and almost $91,000 respectively. We also have a couple of other agreements coming soon regarding the relocating of utilities with both Mid-American Energy and CenturyLink, which have not come to the board yet, and additional architectural services that are yet uninvoiced at about $150,000. So moving forward, if we were to stop things where they are now, we would be risking essentially losing those investments already made, and violating the agreement with Drake, which if we don't move forward with that, ultimately in the long term, we could lose the not only the investment, but also the conveyance of the property on which the stadium is to be located. So we have still a lot of work in front of us on that project, and the tentative date for litigation would be over a year from now, November of 21, and there are still a number of legal steps that need to be taken in advance of that before that would ever come to fruition. So we're essentially just following forward with the course that the board has approved already, and ultimately, there is some risk, but we believe that that's relatively minimal.
Thank you, Tom. I fully and completely support this project and the action that the board has taken to move forward. And again, brought up this issue because I received several comments in addition to ones that I think were sent to the full board. I received probably an additional 8 to 10 personally to me. So that's why I wanted to bring it up. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Are there any other discussion or questions?
Yeah, I do have one question regarding item 6, the DMTRS. I know that, I don't know, some amount of time ago, we closed the program to new participants, and we started talking about some early retirement incentives. I was just wondering if there's been any progress on that, or where that stands at the moment.
Yeah, so we had been making some progress. The administration, mainly Kathy McKay, Shashank Arora, and myself, with the leadership of the DMTRS active committee. We came to the board shortly thereafter, when we not with a plan for board approval, but something that we thought might be workable. The DMTRS team then, after that meeting, came forward with a different proposal that was legally unworkable from a couple of perspectives. So we went back to the drawing board with that group and asked that they reconvene and give us a number of options that they thought they could support, and they came forward with 3 options. There are legal or long-term financial commitments that I think the board would be unwilling to make to execute any of those 3. So we are presently evaluating yet another option. In fact, I had a discussion about this with DMEA leadership earlier today. And so we will be proposing something to the board that we think meets as close as we can what the will of the DMTRS is, and also meet the legal restrictions and the financial restrictions that we have to work within. So it's still an active discussion, and we're hoping that we'll be coming to a formal proposal. A formal proposal in the very near future with the board. Excuse me.
If I could follow up on that question, is there, what's the timeline? I understand that you probably don't have a formal timeline to resolve this, but there are personnel implications, there's budget implications. Is this something that you're targeting to have a workable proposal to us by the end of this year? Is this something where you're trying to have it done?
Yeah, prior to the end of this year. I hope to have a draft proposal, and we'll talk a little bit more about this during the work session. But my hope is that we can have a proposal for first review by the board prior to the end of this month, and then have a discussion about that proposal, or a slightly modified version of that proposal, depending on feedback, prior to the end of November, so that we can actually execute that for this fiscal year for implementation in FY22.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any other discussion or questions? Please call the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The consent items are approved 6-0. Next, we will have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D1, public hearing for the sale and transportation equipment, bus cameras, and infrastructure? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board hold a public hearing and approve the sale of transportation equipment purchased and installed by the district this past spring, which are to be financed by Bankers Trust following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Barron, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Mr. Barron. Any questions or discussion? Please vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer.
Yes.
The vote is approved 6-0. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D2, public hearing for the sale of a portion of vacated Fremont Street Row? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board hold a public hearing and approve the sale of a portion of the vacated Fremont Street right-of-way property to University Group LLC in the amount of $1 following the public hearing.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
Move approval, Caldwell Johnson.
Second, Cody.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Mr. Cody. Any questions or discussion? Please vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano, Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. Next, we have a public hearing. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item D3, public hearing for B8568 Brodie Chiller replacement? Hearing no one, I'll close the public hearing. Dr. Ahart, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by Modus for the Brodie Chiller project, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I please have a motion and a second to approve the public hearing and superintendent's recommendation?
So move, Martirano.
Second, Caldwell Johnson.
We have a motion by Ms. Martirano and a second by Ms. Caldwell Johnson. Any questions or discussion? Please vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. Next, we have a discussion action item E1 monitoring report 2.3 treatment of employees 2020. I will turn this over to Dr. Ahart to introduce the matter.
Thank you. We have three presenters with me tonight for the treatment of staff monitoring report 2.3. And one of those three is a new face to I think the board, because I don't think we've had an opportunity to make an introduction. But we have Susie Tallman, our Chief of Human Resources, and Kathy McKay, our Benefits Director, and Jacob Cummings, who joins us actually almost a year ago now as our Equity and Inclusion Manager. We'll share a lot of what had been shared format-wise last year with some additional detail. I will say that there were a couple of questions regarding this report that we received from the board regarding breakdown of some data that was included that a board member wanted it broken down in a little bit more detail. And so we were able to produce most of that today. And so board members, you will find that in your email inbox, and we can speak to that as we come to that. I think you'll see that the trends in most all of the KPIs are heading in a positive direction, and I will also share that there's some other things in the works that we hope to have added to this next year. Mr. Cody and I had a brief discussion about that on offline earlier in the week, and I want to officially welcome Jake Cummings to DMPS in front of the board, coming to us from Iowa State in a similar role. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Susie, to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Ahart. Can you see the presentation? I shared it. Are you able to see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. I don't know, I presented earlier today and had some funny glitches with it, so please let me know if there's something that goes awry, and I'll work to fix it. However, the HR team is glad to be here tonight to give you an update on the treatment of staff monitoring report. And as Dr. Ahart mentioned, I have a couple individuals presenting with me this evening. One is Jake Cummings. We're really excited to have him in our department, being with us a little over a year. Some of his core responsibilities are background checks, complaint process, investigations, Title IX, and the affirmative action plan. I also have Kathy McKay, Director of Employee Services. I can't say how critical it has been having her this last few months working with individual staff around their health concerns. Appreciate all the work she's done with that. Some of our other duties are also payroll, benefits, employee compensation, and wellness program. And on call, I have Sheila Mason, Director of Classified Staff, and Tiffany O'Hara, Director of Certified Staff. This slide provides just an overview of the KPIs that we'll be presenting this evening, as well as some of the additional information and data that we do share related to treatment of staff. And I just wanted to give a reminder that we also use data from the Council for the Great City of Schools to compare how DMPS is doing with other national peers. The data is lagging, so if you were looking at some of our charts, you'll notice there isn't data for FY 2019 and 2020 simply because they're just a couple years behind in providing it. It is for no reason other than that. I will turn it over to Jake now. He'll review our complaint process, misconduct investigations, Title IX, and some of the important changes that have occurred this year with that and how it'll impact employees. Jake?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahart and Susie, for the introduction. I appreciate it, and I'm truly grateful to be here working and being a part of Des Moines Public Schools. This first slide mentions formal discrimination complaints, and it's categorized as such to bring this report in alignment with this Council of Great City Schools report. And so if you look at this slide, essentially all it is defining the formal complaint process as it relates to our affirmative action policy under section 402 if someone requests an investigation for discrimination on the basis of any of the protected classes that you see there. Next slide, please. Our complaint procedure with regards to complaints that were filed under 402 include informal resolution, so there is an alternative or pathway to resolve the matter informally should the parties choose to do so. The process has been revised to include a complaint to be brought within 300 days. That's a guideline more than a rule. We will entertain complaints that are beyond 300 days, but there are certain consequences with that, mostly being the degradation of evidence. It's better to bring a complaint sooner rather than later. Under the procedure, we're to begin an investigation within 10 days of the filing of the formal complaint, and aspirationally, we're to complete it within 30 days. Sometimes investigations get slowed down due to external factors, and so it's our duty to ensure that people are informed as to the reasons why they get delayed. The purpose of the investigation is to gather information to make the determination as to whether or not there is a violation or not of the district policy, and so that is included in the final report. And then based on what the parties choose to do from there, they can pursue the appeal process. Next slide, please. So the formal discrimination complaints, this chart is tracking the formal discrimination complaints in the district. And I want to say just real briefly, the quick takeaways from this is that for fiscal year 2020, we had 5 formal discrimination complaints under the definition. And so if we think about it in terms of the 5-year aggregate with regards to Des Moines Public Schools, then we were lower than the 5-year mean, which was 8 complaints per year, the average, and we were slightly above the 3-year mean, which was 4.67 complaints. So the thing that I would say about this is that we're a little bit on the low end, but we're basically where we should be. And what's going to be happening in the next year or so is as we bring greater awareness to the process, which is essential, and I'll explain why later, that we may see an uptick in these things. And I would say that that is not a reason to panic or to be pessimistic in saying that things are getting worse, but it's more of we're shining a light on things for people to pursue the avenues for redress. Next slide, please. The formal misconduct investigations, again, this is putting the information in alignment with the Council of Greater City Schools. And basically what this is saying is that if there is a complaint, it could be pursued informally, or it could include the categories of general harassment, sexual harassment, hostile work environment, retaliation, or a complaint of the Employee Handbook policy. Next slide, please. And so here we see the data trends over the last 5 years. And so naturally for fiscal year 2020, because the category is more broad and encompassing, there's going to be a higher number of matters. And so last year we had 15 total. And when I look at the 5-year aggregate or the 5-year mean, it's 14.4 and the 3-year mean is 14.3. So we're pretty close with the last 5 years and 3-year trends in terms of the number of misconduct matters that we are handling. So again, I would say that as we bring awareness to the complaint process, which I would say is not necessarily a bad thing, because there's always a time and a place for a certain thing. One of the things that I'm going to be working on as we're moving forward is seeking avenues for informal resolution. And the reason why that's key is because informal resolution gives the parties greater control and to reach the outcome that they want it takes less time and gets at the heart of the matter. Whereas a complaint process where you're just having an investigation and an outcome might not necessarily solve the underlying issue. It may lead to discipline, but it may not necessarily address the underlying issue. And so the informal process is something that we're going to be looking at engaging more with to help problem solve. But at the same time, the formal complaint process will always be an alternative because there are situations where the investigation complaint process is necessary given the circumstances. So we're looking at ways to problem solve while still maintaining the avenues for investigation that we've had in the past. Next slide, please. Just to bring us up to date, because I know the board approved some changes in the sexual harassment policy, which relates to Title IX. And just to briefly touch upon this, the Title IX rule changes have gone into effect. They were proposed earlier than May 2020, but that's when the heads up came that this rule change was coming down. And then the rule change went into effect on August 14th, 2020. Next slide. So what this means for our district is that we've revised our approach to how we're handling misconduct investigations with regards to sexual harassment complaints as it relates to all individuals within the district. This brings us further in alignment with federal guidance under the new rules, and it has caused us to revise our approach to investigations. So what it means is now in investigations, we have an individual who is strictly dedicated to the gathering of facts, and that is their sole purpose. Then the information gets forwarded on to a decision-making body of individuals to determine if there's a violation or not. And then from there, the parties have the right to appeal. In my opinion, this is a good thing because it's bringing clarity to the process, which brings consistency and faith in the process. And it also compartmentalizes responsibility so that there's a little bit better, more focus on what people are doing, which I think is a good thing. Next slide, please. This is the last thing that I'll comment on. As we continue to adapt our complaint process, we're going to be revising our policies and procedures. One of the things that I'll be looking at next is revising our affirmative action statement, which hasn't been touched, I think, for a little while, and consider the procedure, how we handle those formal complaints to bring it more in alignment with the Title IX types of investigation so that those procedures are following very similar paths. This is to kind of avoid confusion, bring clarity for both processes so we're not always switching in between one or the other. If someone's saying they're being discriminated against on the basis of sex or race, if we have one process, I think that brings consistency that people would appreciate. We've added a Title IX coordinator, and the role of the Title IX coordinator, that is my job, is to oversee the process with regards to Title IX investigations, in addition to training people and making sure that we are tracking the data. And then the fact-finding expert, that is a position that we are working to fill with regards to our investigations. And then under the rules, all employees must be trained on issues of Title IX. And so that those are things that we are taking steps to provide. We've provided safe schools trainings for all employees. But as we continue to grow and mature, we're going to be providing more specific trainings for departmental areas relevant to people, more practical trainings. So we're at the very beginning of improving this process, but that is something that will be coming in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. I'm going to briefly touch on the employee handbook. We've done a complete overhaul and have made a lot of revisions to the employee handbook in order to be better organized and help employees locate critical information that they want to find. And by doing that, it's highlighted some gaps that we have in our employee handbook. So we know that we have some more work to do because there's some information that we can still be providing employees that maybe hasn't been included previously in the handbook. So we'll continue to make enhancements, and of course we'll work in collaboration with the Employee Handbook Committee. They're a great group that we've had that we've collaborated with throughout the year. And it's comprised of DMEA and other district leaders. And so we're able to discuss items that are outside of the comprehensive agreement. We'll be forming some task force groups to focus in on some of the areas where we have gaps in the employee handbook and utilize that committee to provide us some feedback. So you'll continue to see some enhancements. Okay, volunteer survey. Over the years, we've always had positive feedback from our volunteers when we have surveyed them. And we know it's important to look at this information because they are individuals that do support our buildings, our schools and our students, and can help fill gaps when there is an ongoing need or maybe on a one-time basis, depending on what is needed. You can see that there are a couple questions there around our onboarding process that we have some improvements that we need to make. We also know that we don't get a large response rate. So we're going to address both of those things together going into this school year by surveying individuals immediately after they onboard so we can get more timely feedback and make quicker adjustments. And then we're also going to, after an individual volunteers for the district within the month, send them an additional survey with a few more questions so that we can get feedback on their experience. So that way we can be responding more immediately to the information we receive. And we're hoping that that also increases the response rate, because previously it's been given toward the end of the year and that just hasn't yielded the results that we'd like to see. The next few slides that I'll be going over are in relation to our separation rates and our retention rate for teachers. We in HR pay very close attention to these data points because we know how important they are, because it lets us know which employee groups separate from the district and at what rate. And we also know that that can be due to staff engagement. It can be due to management effectiveness or just overall the workforce satisfaction. And if we want to keep staff engaged with the organization, those are critical data points that we need to be paying attention to. Now on this slide, when you look at it, you can see previously, if we're going back to 2016, we kind of were about, I would say, in the middle as far as other districts that we compared ourselves to from the council. However, when you look at the data over our past 3 years, however, our trend is showing that we are declining, which is a great thing. However, when you dig into the data a little bit more, over the years, our teacher group continues to be the group that separates from us at the highest rate. So that's important to be paying attention to. This slide also captures all of our employee groups just into one chart. And if you're looking at FY19 to FY20, you can see where which employee groups have declined in their separation rate. And then we have one employee group that increased slightly. Also in the monitoring report, when looking at the employee groups, we did provide a chart that identifies more specifically who some of these individuals may be when you look at that. Just overall, the average of separation rate when looking at all employees was about a little over 10%. Oh, and one thing I do want to note from that slide, if you break down the employee groups and do look over a 3-year period of time, however, we have a decline in all employee groups of separation rates, which is a good thing. For our teacher retention data, we're looking at 2 things. We're looking at teachers that stay with the district after 1 year on this slide, and we're also looking at teachers that remain with us after 5 years. Since FY 2016, if you were to average over the 5 years, the retention rate for teachers remaining after year 1 is a little bit over 79%. If you look at that in comparison to the council, it's actually pretty good. We rank about 5th out of the 37 districts that responded. Of course, however, we'd like to continue to see that increase. You notice from FY 2019 to FY 2020, we did have a significant increase, and we attribute that to some of the changes in the mentoring program for first-year teachers. It's a little bit more robust, and it continues throughout the school year, which is having more regular checkpoints for teachers, and of course, in their building, they're assigned a mentor as well. And so we're seeing that that may have had a positive impact, and we're anxious to see as we continue to improve those efforts, what results that does yield. When looking at the 5-year data for teachers, if you were to average over the 5 years, we have a retention rate of a little bit over 65%. Of course, we would absolutely like to see that higher because, you know, we invest a lot of time and money and training in teachers, and we want to keep their expertise and reduce our hiring costs and our turnover rates because we know the impact that that has on students. So when digging into this data a little bit more, you notice from 2019 to 2020, there was a dramatic, a pretty significant decline. And as you dig into the data a little bit more, because we want to know about that and we want to know what's happening. And I don't know if it can be attributed to any one thing, but I do know that there, are a handful of things to take into consideration. When looking at the data for this group in particular that we looked at, it was within year 1 and year 2 that at least half of the teachers left the district. We talked about improving our mentoring program for first-year teachers, but I think, our next phase is to also step into second-year teachers and look at what else do we need to be doing, especially when we're losing the majority of teachers that leave us during that time. We also know there's a difference between the teachers and the support, the track that they're on. Our blue teachers remain with us at about a 95% retention rate, which is fantastic. So that lets us know for those teachers that are not in the blue contract, it's having a little bit of a different impact as far as staying with the district. We know through the blue contract, there's more mentoring, there's more professional development, training and support. So that's another area we need to be thinking about for our teaching staff because the data is showing us a difference. We also know when looking at our exit survey data, the top reasons that teachers are leaving us are due to work environment or stress, moving, either the employee moves or a spouse moves, or retirement. And when you look at the data, there isn't necessarily a trend as far as grade level goes. We aren't seeing anything there. We do have a little bit of a higher rate of classroom teachers and special education teachers that are leaving, but not significant. And then, of course, we don't know what the impact of the pandemic has had on some of the staff not returning after last year either. However, when you look at the Des Moines district in comparison to the council, we ranked second out of 37. However, we absolutely know that that is an area we want to continue to focus and improve. So some of the things that we've been doing in response to the data, we've actually been doing a lot. Jake had highlighted some of the things we've been focusing on as far as policy updates, procedures, and processes, but we've really been digging into that this past year and making sure where we see that things aren't working, that we're addressing it and making changes to better meet the needs of our staff. Whether that's been onboarding, our mentoring programs, we've done a big overhaul with our evaluation process to make that more meaningful. And we will continue to do that work moving forward as we get feedback. We've implemented a new structure in human resources that is allowing us to better, hopefully, identify patterns and trends as we're responding to what we know is needed throughout the organization. We've also been leveraging employee surveys to pinpoint specific action steps and to be more targeted where we know we need to, where we're seeing the largest gaps, and coupling that with feedback from employees is pretty significant, and it allows us to develop a better plan moving forward and to target specific employee groups that we know that we need to be paying attention to. And I shared some of those examples of those in the monitoring report, but I just wanted to highlight them again. So as a result of that, some of the things that we've done over the past year is we have partnered our part-time food service staff with Metro. We know that those are two areas we need to be paying attention to, and created full-time positions where employees also received benefits. And we have retained all of the individuals that we made that change with, which is exciting. And now we're looking at how do we expand that. Of course, that does come at a cost, and with the pandemic, that kind of slows things down a little bit, but again, we know that that's something that's been effective and will continue to expand. We also have made some significant changes and enhanced the screening and selection process for bus drivers as another example, just due to the demand. And we've really leveraged their training program to ensure that employees are well prepared. And as a result of the changes that were made with that, we have increased the number that we typically hire by almost 60%. And of course, now I shared the blue contract data with you. And as a result of that, we're excited that we'll be offering a track for individuals that will be interested in special education, because that is a hard to fill position in the district. And so we're going to be providing an opportunity and a great level of support for any new hires that would be interested in that track. And most importantly, we are really investing this year in growing our own. We know how important that is, starting with our students, in order to help continue to diversify our workforce to represent our student population. So I mentioned some programs that Human Resources does support. Our Dream to Teach program, where we are engaging middle school students all the way up to high school that may be interested in becoming an educator, and providing mentoring experiences, some coursework that individuals are able to take, and then also just some assistance with individuals if they're looking to go to college. And so we want to expand that and keep those students connected to the district, because we want them coming back and working for DNPS. We also have a 3D program, which is a partnership with DMAC and Drake University. And it impacts very few employees, actually. And of course, that comes down to funds. So we're looking at how can we identify employees from underrepresented groups and provide an opportunity to go back if interested and get their degree in education. And so whether that's at a reduced cost of tuition, whether there's financial assistance provided, additional mentoring opportunities, all of that is tied into that 3D program. And so we also are looking at building that out more this year. And lastly, you already know about the blue contract, but the nice part about it is we can actually look at a pipeline being developed from the classroom all the way to a teaching position and on into leadership positions. And we're really excited about the impact that can have by investing in our own community, our own students, our own employees, and keeping people here in DMPS. Kathy.
Thank you, Susie. As we continue to monitor the treatment of staff, I'll review with you the KPIs related to the benefits that we offer to staff. This first slide here shows the health benefits cost per enrolled employee. So we take the total health benefit cost divided by the number of employees enrolled. And I want to point out that that's employees enrolled, not total lives covered. So we have about 4,500 employees enrolled, but we cover about 13,000 lives under the plan. So if you'll note, in comparison over the years, our line has actually stayed fairly consistent. In FY20, our numbers dropped just a little bit as far as the cost per employee enrolled. And some of the reasons that may have dipped a little bit, where we did make some significant benefit changes. We changed the specialist copays, we changed deductibles, we changed our pharmacy formulary. All of those will have an impact on our total benefit costs, as well as COVID does have a cost impact for FY20. There were a lot of people who did not seek services from March through the end of our fiscal year, and that did impact our overall costs. I think it's important to note on this, I think the important takeaway would be that we continue to infuse financial resources into our benefit plans, because our employees have voiced that that's a very important benefit to them. And as we compare across with this Council of Great City Schools, we are above the median, significantly above the median, and compare very favorably in this area. The next slide shows the health benefit enrollment rate. So here we're looking at the number of our employees enrolled in comparison to the total number that are eligible. You will see from FY 16 to 17, it looks like a significant increase. We did increase from almost 81% to 88%. Part of that increase in enrollment was due to the ACA and the way that we counted those individuals who are now eligible for benefits. The Affordable Care Act made some changes in how we offered benefits, and that's why we see an increase. I think also important to note is, I get the question a lot, well, geez, I would think that everybody would enroll in Des Moines Schools benefits. They're awesome benefits and they're priced very reasonably. Why is it only 91.75%? And I think the reason that I can say it's 91.75 instead of 100% is we have a lot of individuals who work for the district as spouses. And so only one of those two individuals is enrolled. And so it would show that that other individual is not enrolled in the plan as an employee. So that has an impact on our overall employment numbers. I think our employees continually talk about the importance of the benefits to them. When we survey employees, they talk about, I stay with Des Moines Schools because of benefits, or I came to Des Moines Schools because of benefits. And we want to continue to make sure that we're using our financial resources accordingly to provide them with the best benefits that we can for the dollars that we're spending. The Health Benefits Advisory Committee has been very integral in making changes and making recommendations and analysis of our benefit plan designs. We will continue to do that moving forward. Some of the things that we will be looking at are industry trends. For an example, where do we fall within the industry, and are we where we want to be? Do we want to be known as the district with the best benefits? Do we want to be middle of the road? What's our philosophy on that? And we'll continue to work on that. We're continuing to look at ancillary benefits this year. We currently spend about $64 million a year on health insurance, but we also spend about $6.2 million on ancillary benefits. So those ancillary benefits are important for us to continue to look at to see if there's room for changes, savings, and how to maximize our dollars there. And then we'll also continue to look at what the impact of COVID has been on our benefits. We want to make sure, as we're looking at trends, that we don't, for an example, look at our health insurance and say, oh, the health insurance went down this year, so we don't need to make benefit changes. Well, it may have gone down artificially because of some things related to COVID. And for those individuals who will now seek care that they put off from March to June, now seek care, so our numbers may be increasing. So we need to look at the impact of COVID on our overall benefits. But I think we're proud of our benefits and the role that they have in the recruitment and the retention of our employees. And I think our employees value those benefits. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
Before we get started with questions, may I please have a motion and a second to approve the monitoring report 2.3 treatment of staff 2020?
Caldwell Johnson, move approval.
Sawyer, second.
We have a motion by Ms. Caldwell Johnson and a second by Ms. Sawyer. Do we have any questions or discussion?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. First of all, I guess this would probably be best addressed by Jake. But when you talked about that decision maker, so someone's going to gather the facts and then someone else is going to decide. Is that the same decision maker each time, or is that kind of rotated among people in different areas, or how does that look?
Thank you. That's a very good question. And so what it's going to look like, we are still in the process of building it, but it won't be very complex to build out. What the vision is that it would be a panel of decision makers. In my mind, I would think it would be a total of 3 decision makers, simple majority rules. And so what we will need to do, and what we're going to be working on here very shortly, is gathering those individuals and training them up with the help of Allers, because they have some expertise with regards to how to evaluate evidence. I do too, but they will also kind of help influence that and shape that. And so the thinking is to have a pool of decision makers. That way, if there's a conflict for whatever reason, we can have other people that can step in, or if someone's sick or ill, that process doesn't miss a beat. So a panel of decision makers, I'm thinking 3 people, simple majority rules.
Okay, and related to that, this is more of a terminology question, I guess, but when it said, misconduct investigation among the teaching staff, there's a bunch of different groups in there. Is that like a teacher brought this forward, or it was brought forward against a teacher? Not to put teachers on the spot, but just for example.
Yeah, and is that in reference to the information that was supplemented?
Probably, yeah, I just read it somewhere today.
Yeah, so as I was helping formulate the response to that, it was my understanding that it was the individual bringing the complaint.
Okay. So just to finish that thread, a teacher would have brought that complaint 38% of the time, or whatever it happened to be.
Yeah, and I think that was, I believe so. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking at my notes here. Yes.
Okay. And then my next question, I'm not sure who would get this one, but the Council for Great City Schools data didn't seem to have 19 or 20. Is that because that data hasn't been released yet, or because they've stopped collecting it?
Yeah, it's because it hasn't been released yet. So there's a lag in time that we receive the data. So we're always they will always be a couple years behind.
Okay.
And that's just how it's been with the council.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. I was just curious.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess then my final question is, I noticed that there's the highest turnover among the two classified groups. Has there been any discussion about, I don't know, potential incentives or benefits or things that might be put in place to get those numbers lower?
Yeah, when looking at the data a little bit more, it does highlight one group in particular that actually had a separation rate that was considerably higher than the other groups. And a lot of them, in fact, are employees in the current position that they serve that are part-time. And I think the challenge with that is that, people are looking for full-time work, and they're also looking for benefits. And so that has been a position that I think, is showing that each year we're hiring a lot of good individuals, but yet then a lot of good individuals are leaving us too. So I had mentioned how we had coupled a couple positions between food service and Metro. And that was one of the strategies that we utilized in order to help address that, because we knew that it was a problem. And so those are the individuals we piloted this past year, and all of them have stayed with us. So it shows us that that was a good thing. Because they also, not only are they full-time, but they're receiving benefits as well. And we know for that group that that's important. So we're looking at how we can expand it. But of course, those both of those departments are enterprise funds. And so it does mean coming up with money. And so there's been a little bit of impact from COVID. And so we would like to continue to expand that. But it's going to be, how much can the department support financially in order to do so. So that's one of the strategies that we use, but I know it can't be our only one. And we've already followed up with the department, and I have a manager connected to that group that is just working on what are some other strategies we can utilize. Are there mentorship opportunities that we can be providing, and really to get some feedback from that employee group in particular, what else may be needed that we just aren't thinking of.
Yeah, and there's some finance related benefits, if you will, that we're considering as well. Savings plans that can be done automatically through payroll, possibility of extending low cost, low interest, short-term loans for emergency purposes, so that employees have access to things that perhaps their credit wouldn't necessarily provide them in the free market. And then the other piece that is a longer term project that we've been slowly building out from teachers on out, and are hoping to develop across the organization is simply career paths. So when you get hired in whatever position in Des Moines, whether it's full-time or part-time, being able to clearly understand what other opportunities may be available to you, and what and what the path is to get there. So that if we get folks on, especially as Susie had mentioned, those folks that are serving in a part-time role, that we can retain that talent by growing it and providing them additional opportunities by helping support their career growth with a specific track in mind that they decide.
Okay, yeah, that all sounds very good. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or discussion?
I have a question. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me because my headphones are not working. So I'm using my computer now. So the question I have is, what efforts are being made to diversify our staff? And I know I had asked the question to gather more information of how diverse our staff is, and I know that that was going to take some time, but I am interested in that data. So I know, Susie, you talked about the 3D program. Are there other efforts that HR is currently undertaking at this time?
Yeah, so, I mentioned Dream to Teach because Dream to Teach is working with students from underrepresented groups. I don't think I mentioned that earlier. 3D is also identifying current employees that are from underrepresented groups. And then, Blue Contract is open to everyone. Those are some things. We've, have done some significant structuring in the department itself. In order to create a greater emphasis on recruitment and retention efforts, because we just, how the department was structured previously, it just didn't lend itself to be able to do that. So we have an individual that does help focus in on some of our hard to fill positions, and we're coupling that and working with some of our recruitment efforts, that we currently do, of how we're maybe advertising for positions, how we're utilizing job fairs, how we're going out into the community where we know we need to be connecting in order to capture individuals into the district. There's been an emphasis on that, but we're placing a greater emphasis on that and actually being able to carve out some time to be able to do that. So we're currently taking what we know has been working in the department right now and just expanding that and being able to build that out even more. We're being really targeted with our job fairs, and during the time of the year that we're doing that, we're also capitalizing on our student teachers. We know that we get about 150 student teachers, and that we need to spend time with them and offering an opportunity for some meet and greets, so that we're checking in with them regularly, and especially for those that are from underrepresented groups, what else can we be doing to provide some additional support? Managers have smaller networks of buildings, so we're hoping that that can help personalize some of the support that is going out into the field related to that. And so there are a variety of strategies that we're utilizing in order to address that. And, filling Jake's position, that was a position that was vacated for a period of time. And the great part about that is bringing him on board, just some of the work that we've been able to do to make sure that we are addressing employee concerns. But also, I think what I would add to that is a little bit of the work that Jake is doing, but also our emphasis on recruitment and retention is, when we're looking at the data and some of our employees that are separating at high rates, gathering feedback and developing some affinity groups so that we can hear from the employees themselves and do a better job of identifying the strategies that we want to use in order to capture and keep employees, especially from underrepresented groups, because we haven't made a concerted effort, I don't think, that we could, and leveraging some of that information to absolutely do a better job. We also have been working very closely with the anti-racism group that's been established from the community forums, and we're using them as a sounding board to take some of our ideas to them, and then also for them to provide feedback to us, because we know that we aren't thinking of everything. And so we appreciate that opportunity to do that work. And we've really just started that, and we're starting with our affirmative action plan, and then some of our growing our own work to get feedback on that as well. And we most recently met with them to talk about our hiring process and what are some of the impediments maybe that we may be creating that we don't realize, and just taking a critical eye for us and giving us some good feedback of some things that we can be thinking about and potentially be making some changes with as related to our hiring and onboarding process.
Just another quick question. When you look at your separation data, do you disaggregate that based on race, and are you finding trends in that data?
Yeah, I had broke down into some of the different groups as far as employee groups that are separating from the district. And when looking at race, really in particular, I had mentioned the group previously that we have a lot of part-time employees. We had about 40 individuals from this employee group that did leave the district after this year. Half of those were from underrepresented groups. And so, which is why I had mentioned that earlier, and knowing that the emphasis we need to place on that. As far as other trends coming out of that, it's really kind of just a smattering for this past year's data. You know, whether it's related to different levels. If I'm looking at race, the majority of individuals leaving the district are white. We do have about 16% that are African American and 7% that are Hispanic.
So kind of taking into context those numbers, what does that mean in terms of proportionality? Like what's the total, like would you have off the top of your head, how many percentage of our staff are white, African American, Latinx?
Sure. So if you're looking at certified staff, it's a little over 93% staff that are white. Classified are a little over 68%. Hispanic certified are 2%. Classified 8.5%. African American for certified is 2.6%, and classified is 13.6%. So if you're looking at the separation rate, that's fairly comparable to the data that we're seeing. It's not over largely representative of a particular group necessarily. Asian is 1%, and classified is for certified 7% for classified. And then if we're looking at 2 or more races, 4% certified, 0.4% certified, and 1.5% classified.
Thank you. I have no more questions.
Sure.
I have a clarifying question around the data regarding separation as well as teacher retention. Are those numbers compiled strictly of staff that have left voluntarily, or are we including positions that have been eliminated or staff that have left for various other reasons?
Sure, that includes staff that have resigned, retired, or have been terminated.
Do any other board colleagues have any more questions? Ms. Martorano, did you have another question? Okay.
Madam Chair, I did have one quick question. I want to just refer back to the blue contract, which I think is a great opportunity, has already been mentioned, to really sort of grow our own and create career pathways for people given educational attainment, and how that creates, I think, a much deeper bench and level of capacity for our district overall with individuals who have master's degrees. I do have a question with regard to individuals that have participated in the Blue contract, and I don't even recall how long we've been involved in that program with Drake. But I'm wondering, of the individuals that have received the master's degree through the Blue contract, how many of those individuals have actually been moved into other leadership roles in the district? Has it really achieved the goals that were intended when we established the program? And at what rate? Or is there a way that we can really measure the impact of it?
Yeah, I don't have that data with me this evening, but I certainly can look into that and get that to the board. I want to say, I think, and Tiffany, if you correct me if I'm wrong, are we in year 8 or year 7?
Year 8.
Year 8. So that's the last year of the program. So I think maybe Terry, to answer your question, we will probably see now as individuals are exiting out of the Blue contract. Would you agree with that, Tiffany?
Yes.
And then just another quick question, and yes, I would like to see that data because I think that would be really helpful. I know that that's been a great opportunity for us to also attract individuals to the district, even beyond the salary and benefits packages that we provide, being able to get a paid master's degree after you commit, what is it, 5 years that you're required to commit to the district post-graduation from Drake?
Yeah, typically it's 5 years if they're on track. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. I do think that trying to determine whether or not there are other ways that we could sort of replicate the notion of the Blue contract relative to other opportunities that we might be able to utilize to attract individuals of color to the district is something that I really think that we could really gain some traction on about now. And I do think that we have had, sort of stops and starts on our ability to create stronger collaborative opportunities with HBCUs and other entities where typically you would be able to tap into talent for hiring for the district. But I really think that we really need to really begin to figure out how we can push the envelope on that, because I know we've been challenged by our number of minority teachers and or administrators for some period of time. And I just feel like we really need to be much more intentional about that work. I know that there's been some work underway, and I think I have a meeting set up with Tim and a couple of other folks here in a couple of weeks to talk about the talent pipeline, I guess, that's been created. But I really feel like we need to strike while the iron's hot and really create some really strong connections that really allow us to maximize our ability to attract brown and black individuals to this district, given the demographics of the students we're serving. That's all my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, hearing no further discussion or questions, please call the vote.
Mr. Barron,
Yes.
Ms. Bradley,
Yes.
Ms. Caldwell Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Cody,
Yes.
Ms. Martirano,
Yes.
Ms. Sawyer.
The vote is approved 6-0. Next, we have an item E2, receive and file superintendent's recommendation to terminate employee contract. I will turn this over to Dr. Ahart to introduce the matter.
I am submitting a recommendation for termination of a teaching contract to the board in a sealed envelope for filing with the board.
Please let the record show that the board has received and filed this recommendation.
And I would ask Susie to stop sharing her screen. Thank you.
Information only items. I want to draw the board's attention to a couple of information only items this evening. A couple have been added, so there's 4 of them. I think 2 was shown previously. The first one is preliminary plans for various school improvement projects. The second is the governance committee recommendations. Third is the 2.111 monitoring report and draft of our legislative priorities. Items of privilege. Next on the agenda, we have items of privilege. Chair's report. I would just like to go back to the information only items just to remind of my board colleagues that we had decided that we would get information about 2.11, our monitoring report, every first Tuesday of the month that we have a meeting. So we'll get a report from Tom then. And then also the governance committee has made a recommendation to modify the way in which we do our monitoring reports, and Ms. Monterano has shared that with Tom. And so we will be discussing that at a later date, but we are in the process of making some recommendations as a governance committee. And then we will be talking about the draft legislative priorities and approving those hopefully at our next board meeting. Do any other board members have any updates or comments to share?
I do have a couple, and I did email the board these items last night as well, but also want to share with the public that this Saturday, the Community Legislative Action Team of a committee of our board is hosting an action summit. These are virtual events, I should clarify. An action summit on Saturday at 9 a.m. And then on November 21st is our date for our first legislative coffee. If you want to learn more information about those events, go to Facebook, our Facebook page, which is DMPS, Community Legislative Action Team. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boyer. Is there any other updates and comments from any of my board colleagues? Okay, I will turn it over to Dr. Ahart for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. I just want to call attention to the 2.11 monitoring report, item number 3, and information only. And what I really want to highlight there is that we've completed 1 week of preschool in person, and we're in week 2, and we just completed the 2nd day of in person for our hybrid elementary plan. In order to be as accurate as we can with attendance, we've provided an extra window of time for teachers to take attendance. Some of our teachers, as you know, are serving some students in person and some virtually, and the default for the state for attendance taking is that if nothing is recorded, the student defaults to present, and we want to make sure we're keeping better track of exactly how well we're connecting with our students. So we're defaulting to absent. And so we're giving our teachers an extra window of time. So they're not reporting attendance, or not required to report attendance until noon the following day. So what you see, and it's noted there in the file, but I didn't want anyone to get too excited about the attendance not being through today, because what was reported by noon today was actually reflective of attendance through yesterday. That obviously will be a much more meaningful data point as we move through and get more and more of our students back, because we haven't even had the first day of cohort B in our K-5 in person yet. The second thing I wanted to call the board's attention to is the draft legislative priorities. You'll note that there are 4 priorities being proposed. The first 3 look essentially the same as what we were pursuing last year, and we don't think that the priority really should change in that regard. But there's a 4th one that speaks to asking the state, and we've had this discussion with the UEN, and we'll be having this discussion, and we've initiated this discussion with IASB as well, but Many districts around the state are seeing a drop in enrollment, at least for the beginning of the year through the October 1 count date. And as you all know, our per pupil funding is for a year is based on the official count on October 1 the prior year. So we want that to be recognized by the legislature as they consider public school funding for FY22. So that we can do something hopefully beyond the budget guarantee for those districts. And it's a wide swath of districts that are seeing a decrease in enrollment, particularly around preschool and kindergarten age levels, where it appears that a number of families are taking a red shirt year, if you will, to not have their child's first year in school be during the pandemic. So with that, I just want to also recognize the efforts of our building leadership and our teachers who have who continue to demonstrate extraordinary flexibility and persistence and dedication to ensuring that every single one of our students is served effectively and that we're capturing their needs and ensuring that they're connected with the community resources in addition to the academic support that's required for their success. And so with that, I will close.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ahart, for your report. Seeing that there is no other business, the meeting is adjourned and our work session will begin in 5 minutes.
Boy, I got cold all of a sudden. Yeah. Ooh. Thank you.
Shashank, do you want to share your screen so you can drive the presentation?
Sure, I can, Tom. Let me know if everyone can see my screen.
Yeah, we can. Do you want to put it in presentation mode so it's just a little bit bigger?
Sure. Shall I start?
Let's wait for Dwana. Are we good to?
Yep, I think everyone's here. We're good.
All right. Yep.
Okay. So I wanted to share what we want to talk about the budget today. What are the risks and unknowns that we are aware of at this point in time? What has been the evolving fiscal strategy? What are the financial measures and objectives? The statewide solvency ratios, the general fund forecasts, and what are the options to reduce costs? So what are the risks and unknowns? The enrollment is down by almost 997, and this is the single largest decrease that we have had for the district. This will not impact us in FY21, but will definitely have an impact in FY22 and for the years beyond. And the reason why I say that is that at this point in time, we don't know what percentage of these students will come back either in FY22 or 23. This is a trend which has been observed nationally, and it's not unique just to our state where the enrollment is down. A lot of parents are redshirting at this point in time. And if you were to look at our numbers, the biggest reductions are in pre-K and K, followed by elementary school. But the biggest decrease is between those two grades, pre-K and K. So this is something which all of us are evaluating to find out what percentage of students will come back. And as we know, that the state has a requirement that the students have to be in school at the age of 6. And depending on whether they come back in pre-K or K, kindergarten definitely impacts what kind of funding would be received by our district. The second factor that comes into play is the Iowa Revenue Estimating Conference. The latest estimates are very optimistic. However, the REC board will meet again sometime in December, and typically the decisions are made based on the December REC conference, even though the SSA that will be given to us would not be known till February, March of the following year. But at this point in time, the numbers that have come out in the month of October seem to be really optimistic. So based on that, what we are doing is we are budgeting our financials at this point in time, as we have done historically, at 1% SSA aid. The other big unknown for us is the compliance. The state has a requirement that we need 50% of the students in person to be in school and physically present in school. We don't know how this will impact, because as everyone knows that the return to learn plan for our district, we started a little late. We wanted to go fully virtual, which was not acceptable to the state. And I don't want to get into the details over here, but we all know what it is. We are hoping that the impact would be nil, but as of now, we don't know what the cost would be.
Excuse me, Shashank.
Sure.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but I think that there's something I want to correct in the way you phrased that. You said the state's requiring 50% of the students to be in person. It's the state's requiring that 50% that we offer an instructional model that allows for 50% in-person instruction. But that's not specified on the number of children that seek that as opposed to the number that seek to be in virtual.
That is correct, Rob.
Okay.
That is correct. The other unknown is the HEROES Act, which is a new federal stimulus bill which is under discussion. It has gone by some of the names as well. But it is being debated. It has been debated for the last 2 to 3 months, but more likely than not, it is going to pass only after the election. Something different over here is when the ESSERS bill was passed, we got, as a district, and all the districts, at least in the state of Iowa, got the payments up front. And then we had to submit the claims and show to them what expenses we had incurred. The state after that has changed. So when we got the money for the GEAR funds, they said this is what is allocated to the Des Moines district. However, the cash would come to us based on expenses incurred. So we anticipate a similar thing would happen when the new federal stimulus bill would get approved, if it does get approved. And obviously, the single largest cost of the district is compensation. And we at this point in time don't know whether the compensation, what the compensation increase would be. Tom, do you want to add any color to this slide?
No, I guess just to say that this year is especially challenging in navigating the budget for FY22, just because the enrollment was certainly the enrollment decrease was certainly something that we could not have predicted last year. It's a trend that's affecting many districts. Ankeny actually reported its first negative net increase in enrollment in, I believe it's 35 years this year. So almost everybody is being impacted to some degree or other. We're actively researching exactly where and why each of the students that we were anticipating being in the district are not here, and what we might expect next year with that group of students, and what impact it will have on especially the needs at preschool and kindergarten for next year. So that's a big wrinkle. The political climate is at a place where I've never seen it, and you've all probably followed to some degree or other, you know, what the House was proposing for a new stimulus act, and then what the Senate was not willing to entertain, and now, you know, and the president until recently said he wasn't interested in anything, and now potentially he is, but not until after the election. And so I think a lot of what will happen financially for the district rests a lot on what happens on November 3rd, both at the state level and the federal level. You know, there's a chance, for instance, that the state house could flip to a Democrat majority. If that happens, then the three-legged stool of state government looks a lot different than it did if all three branches or all three houses are in the same majority. So there's just a whole lot of uncertainty that's different and greater than it is in a normal, quote unquote, normal year. So that's something that we need to continue to pay close attention to, and hopefully, you know, hopefully early in the new year, we'll have considerable more certainty on some of these larger unknowns.
The only thing I would clarify in enrollment is that pre-K, we are not funded at a multiplier of 1. It is 0.5. So the impact is also reduced for pre-K over here. Going to the next slide. So our fiscal strategy has been basically to increase the spending authority to close to 15%. So when we first came up with the strategy in FY20, we decided to reduce $24 million for 3 years, a total of $72 million. Last year, based on where the spending authority forecast was working out, much better than what we had anticipated, we reduced it from 21 to 23 to $14 million each year. However, based on the uncertainties and what is going on, I'm flipping to the next slide, is if you see the column on the left was what we had last year with what I had shared. And the one on the right is based on our forecast, where exactly we would be. And what is the big change? The big change is basically in FY 2022, where we have decided that the reduction in amount would be $20 million. And the reason why we are increasing it to $20 million is because $14 million is what we had decided last year. And that $14 million is very close to what the cost increase for the district is in terms of compensation and other increases there. And we said if we maintain that strategy, the cost for the district would remain flat. But unfortunately, there has been a reduction in the enrollment, and that impact would be another $6 million. So we decided to bolt on that $6 million to the $14 million we had decided to have a budget reduction for FY 2022 for $20 million. And this year we have kicked off our subcommittee to start discussions. In June, July, we started the discussions to come up as to how we are going to reach this target. If we were to reach the target of $20 million for FY22, the spending authority forecast by FY23 would be what the board has aimed for, which is 15.2%.
I would just also note that what we had projected as the unspent spending authority at the end of the last fiscal year was 3.3%, and we ended almost 2% higher at 5.2%. So that put us in a little bit better circumstance than would otherwise have been the case.
Hey, Tom and Shashank, I just have a real quick question to make sure I'm clear. So on the right side, fiscal 21, which is the year that we're currently in, 14 million, and then fiscal 22, that takes into account the 900 plus loss in enrollment times 7,000 students, and that's what then takes us from the 14 to the 20 million. Is that correct?
That is correct, Terry. But the
Okay.
only difference would be is that full out of the 1,000 students, quite a few of them are pre-K as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not the full impact of 7,000 times 1,000 students. It's a little bit lower. But
Yeah.
but yes, and at a high level, what you're saying is absolutely correct.
Right. So, and this does not take into consideration then in any subsequent year that we would have any drop in enrollment. Is this just taking our current status quo with the net 900 and holding the line on that in the subsequent year then for fiscal 23, or is that, does that have any play in it with regard to student enrollment as well?
And Terry, that is the big question which is being discussed both at the state level and at the national level. We don't know at this point in time how many of those 1,000 students are going to come back, or have we lost a few permanently.
Okay.
And I mean, there was just an article today which came out that Chicago has seen the single largest drop in its history. And so what we have done for our financial assumptions, because we do know that 1,000 students have been lost, but looking into a longer term strategy, not knowing how many of them will come back, we have based our financials on a little bit different assumptions. And I will go through that, which is going to be the next slide. That will help us understand what are the assumptions that we are basing our. So if you see over here, we are showing what is the certified enrollment, which was October 1, 2019, and now what it is now, which is the reduction of approximately 1,000 students, and the unspent spending authority and the different ratios of both spending authority as well as solvency ratio. But something that I would want to highlight over here is, or I should go probably to the next slide, which will be better if I can transition to it. Okay, so what are the assumptions that we have actually done for the forecast? So we have said 1% SSA growth, the decline of 997 students in enrollment. When we did the budget, because we don't know how many students will come back, for the sake of today's discussion, we are still assuming 250 decrease year over year as we have done in the past. And because if we dropped 1,000 kids in 22 without having an offsetting increase in the future years, the financials would have not been a true representation of what is going to happen. On a worst case basis, if the 1,000 students are lost, there is something called a budget guarantee, which basically ensures that there should be at least 1% increase in the revenues that the district would receive. And that would then kick in case finally the reduction of 1,000 students happen. But there is also a provision called on-time board. I think that's the right term, where if these students were to come back in FY22, even though the enrollment numbers today show a reduction, we can go to the state and request us to be given the spending authority for those 1,000 students in FY22. So at least we will get the spending authority. It won't be cash in FY22. The cash will come in 23, but at least the spending authority will come in. And having that large balance of both fund balance as well as unspent spending authority is going to help us over here. So if we have a large fund balance, then this spending authority which we will get, we have the cash available, even though the cash will come in the following year. The other assumptions that we have made is the salaries and benefits increase would be up to 3% a year. We obviously don't know what the negotiations would lead to. The other expenditures, as every year, we are taking it at 1%. And this is the amount that I was mentioning, which is a reduced expenditure by $20 million in FY22, and then again $14 million in 23 onwards. Some of the things I would want to highlight is the projections here. So because of COVID, as Tom was mentioning, it's becoming increasingly difficult as to what would be these unexpected, unbudgeted expenses. We have seen as a district that we have incurred expenses that we had not planned for, whether it was hand sanitizers and masks and face shields or giving laptops and modems and other things. We also don't know how the revenues will get impacted, what kind of programs will come over there. Could there be a potential loss of revenue because of COVID? The state's revenue collections may not be at the best level and we may get zero SSA. There could be across the board cuts. So there are a lot of variables which are at this point in time as we are making these budget assumptions for 21, 22 and beyond. So with this forecast, which I had shared, and now I'll come back to this financial measures and objectives. So here, if you see, we are showing, as far as enrollment goes, the reduction of approximately 1,000 students, and then assuming 250 students reduction versus 31,000, because we don't know how many students will come back, what the unspent spending authority or unauthorized budget would be for 21 and 22, and how does it translate into the ratio. So we know our goal is to achieve 15%. We are going to be getting close to that by 22. So we're on the right track. The solvency ratio, which our track was 15%, or our objective was 15%, we would be higher. And in the next slide, I would share as to where are the different districts within the state. And then the two big drivers are obviously the SSA, where we are assuming a 1% for 22, and the settlement with DMEA, which is the largest union that we talk to, is no greater than 3%. Any questions on either this or the assumptions that I had shared a slide before?
Yeah, Shashank. Please, Terry.
No, go ahead, Rob.
On solvency ratio, there's a catch or a trigger somewhere if it gets too high, isn't there?
So let me flip to the next slide. And I think what you are saying is more for the cash levy ratio over there, which comes out there. So if you see the distribution across the state, we have districts which are as high as 60%, very few, but they are. And we would be following if we are able to achieve that more on the right hand side of this graph versus the left hand side. Yeah. But there are districts all across the board starting at a little over 0% to as high as 60%. So the basic impact that happens is the cash reserve levy that we have, that levy charging would be reduced proportionately in case the ratio exceeds beyond 20%. But that budget guarantee that I just mentioned in the previous slide, that money actually comes from the cash reserve levy. So if this drop actually happens, that money would come from the cash reserve levy, and then the solvency ratio would reduce because we don't get the cash over there. We just get for here we'll get both the cash and spending authority over here, but the onboarding students will only get the spending authority here. So this particular thing, if you see, Rob, the districts all across the board, it impacts your cash reserve levy. It's not that we can't go above 20%. And that's the reason why I wanted to insert this slide, to give us a flavor of where exactly each districts are. Terry, you had a question? Sorry,
Thank
Rob,
you.
did that answer you?
That's okay. I did have a quick question on the assumptions. So the assumption that we're using is 1% SSA. And I think typically we have historically, underassumed what we might get, not recognizing or not knowing exactly where the state's going to end up. But we had for several years been getting around 1%. This last year we got, 2.3, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
So there's still the possibility, based on the Revenue Estimating Committee and where they end up, that we still might be a little ahead of this 1%. So this is a conservative assumption, correct?
I would say yes, but the reason why I hesitate is COVID is still not over, and the revenues are being impacted. We were fortunate as a state that we were sitting on huge surpluses, which is helping us at this point in time. If we did not have those surpluses, I would have hesitated saying that based on what REC is saying, that hopefully there should not be a sufficient decline. So that is where my hesitation lies at this point in time, Terry, because the COVID is not over. We don't know what's going to happen. And even if the state approves an SSA of higher than 1% in February, March, they may come across some of the guidance of either across the board cut, or may lower the SSA. We don't know what the variables are. So yes, to your point, based on what we know today, I am being a little conservative. Yes.
That's fair. And then my only other question is, what does 1% represent in terms of actual dollars?
So the basic is approximately around $2.5 million. So the interesting thing is 1% is $2.5 million as far as SSA growth goes, but 1% settlement with the unions is not 2.5, but it's almost $3.5 to $4 million. So something for us to really appreciate is that if we get a 1% SSA growth, it translates to less than 1% increase for the union settlement. And I think a lot of people get confused and they assumed if we have got 1% SSA growth, giving 1% as part of the union negotiations should not be a problem.
Yeah, that becomes really important when we factor in the cost of doing business, recognizing that I think 80% of our costs are
Correct.
personal services.
Correct.
So even at 1%, it's not even close to keeping up with what our actual cost of doing business is on an annual basis. And every year we get 1% or anything less than our actual bargained contracts, we're falling behind, which is what adds to that gap.
Absolutely. Yep,
Yeah.
You're right. You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one, Shashank.
Sure.
You mentioned some sort of mechanism for those kids who are gone this year if they were to come back later, that the state could kind of smooth that out a little bit. Could you talk more about that?
Sure. So there are two scenarios. One is if these kids so we, as you know, we submit our enrollment numbers in October of this year, so 20, and that is going to impact us for the fiscal year 22. So if these 1,000 students came back in the fiscal year 22, we can go to the state and say that there was a significant drop. These students are coming back. Can we have the spending authority for that? Because we do need to provide instructions and everything else. The state would give us the spending authority, but not the cash. The cash would come to us in 23 because that enrollment increase happened in 22. So we get the spending authority. And Cody, the benefit is that we do have the cash, so it is not going to create a challenge. If we did not have the cash, or a fund balance as we call it, then it would be a significant challenge.
Okay, so related to that, like, is it any number of those kids come back? Is it the same number? Like, what happens if 600 come back, but we're still short 300, I guess?
Even then we can go and do exactly the same thing. We can, yeah. Absolutely.
And you were saying that if there were some big federal COVID relief package that could smooth out a lot of this as well, potentially?
That is like we were talking, a little unknown over there, and this is what I think you're mentioning, the HEROES Act, correct?
Yeah.
So that is unknown, and we know the kind of back and forth that has happened between the two parties. But if it were to come back, and as I was indicating, that we would get the cash after we have incurred the expenses. So it is quite possible that we may be incurring those expenses in a period longer than 1 year. So if we incur in 1 year, yes, to your point, we would get the cash back. But if it rolls over multiple years, then we'll get the cash based on when we spend it. To give you an example, we got approximately around $1.2 million for gear funds, and we have a contract with T-Mobile to provide modem for our kids. If the same policy had existed for ESSER, we would have got $1.2 million in cash. But because we are paying the T-Mobile over a period of 12 months, we will be getting this amount over a period of 12 months. So that will overlap in 2 fiscal years versus 1 fiscal year.
Okay, and and back to those legislative priorities, there was one in there about, I can't remember how it was phrased, address the wide swath of lost kids or whatever. Like, what is the end goal on that? Like, what could we look for that maybe the state could help with?
Tom, do you want to come on that?
Yeah, so actually, maybe first we should talk about we talked about the in-time. If we got a number of those students back, we could get spending authority for those, but I don't think we really talked about the budget guarantee. Do you want to address the budget guarantee Shashank,
Sure.
a little bit in a little bit more detail,
Sure.
because that gets more to the point of the that fourth proposed legislative priority.
So the way budget guarantee works is every year we do come to the board at the same time that we are getting our budget approved to say that in case there is a drop from the amount that the district received in the previous year, then we would get at least 1% increase from the previous year. So speaking from memory, approximately we got $231 million for the students that were enrolled at around $7,000 a student. And that is where, Terry, I was saying $2.5 million is 1%. It's $2.3 million. So if that were to happen, the budget guarantee kicks in. So we get 1% of $231 million, because $231 million is what we got last year, times 1%, $2.3 million we get additional. So even though the students have dropped, we would still get 1% higher than what we received last year.
Yeah, and so what we would be pushing for legislatively are potentially two things. One, and you know, for us, it's a wash on the in-time funding, not a wash, but we're in a position to be able to take advantage of spending authority if those students came back, because we have a very healthy fund balance. Not everybody is in that boat, and so some districts will want not just the in-time spending authority, but also cash to back it up. Otherwise, it won't do them much good. And the other piece is beefing up the budget guarantee. So the total loss of revenue in FY22 that districts experience from lost enrollment would be made up both in spending authority and in actual dollars, and not just that 1% relief.
So that is a good protection measure which the school districts in Iowa have, so that even if the enrollment really comes down, we do get at least a 1% increase over the previous year. And this amount actually comes from property taxes, and this comes from the cash reserve levy. And Rob, to your point, since the solvency ratio is going high, we have to reduce cash reserve levy. But if this kicks in, then the solvency ratio drops a little bit, and it would help us.
And that budget guarantee, that's written into the law there, is that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's guaranteed by the state, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
That is correct. So even this time, when I had come to the board for approval of a budget for FY21, there was one section over there which said about the budget guarantee. So that is why, just as a precaution, every year when the district comes to the board for approval of budget, we have another approval for 1% of budget guarantee. I don't remember when the district would have used it, but if we had to look at the SSA growth that has come, probably 8 to 10 years back, we would have used it, but not in the recent past, at least. Any other question?
Can we just keep moving through the presentation since you're not done
Sure.
yet?
So this is the other general fund forecast. Over here, basically, we're trying to show.
Hey, Shashank, can you enlarge that a little bit? Is that possible to enlarge it a little bit on your screen?
No, unfortunately, this is the presentation mode down there.
Okay, all right.
Sorry about that. So this is the total revenue. And Terry, if you say that I was just talking about $231 million and why is it $466 million? That is because this also includes lots of other items like your AEA flow through, your SPED, which is not part of the regular $7,000, your ELL, TSS, all kinds of different things come up, which comes to this $466 million. That 1% increase is basically the number of students times 7,000. It is not on this total amount of $466 million.
Oh, and I just, sorry, the board members, you should have this presentation in your inbox I sent it late this afternoon. So if it's easier for you to see it on your own screen and manipulate size and so forth, feel free to do that.
So obviously FY19 and FY20 are actuals, but 21, if you look at 21, our revenues are $466 million, expenditures of 439. So basically our revenue over expenditure is around $27 million. And we had an ending fund balance in FY20 of $125 million. So the ending fund balance in 21 becomes $151 million. And this is what we use to calculate the solvency ratio, unspent spending authority, and the unspent authorized budget. So when you calculate the solvency ratio, we have to remove items like the flow through AEA, any restricted funds and things like that. And unspent spending authority is basically what do we have for this year as the total unspent authority times the revenue. And down below in the small table, I have shown what are the assumptions which we have discussed, like the SSA we are assuming at 1%, enrollment, which I had mentioned, even though it's 1,000 reduction, we don't know how many will come back. So we are showing 250 students reduction, assuming that 1% inflation increase, the compensation, which we are going to be negotiating, but we are saying at a max of 3%, and the expenditure reduction, which is $22 or $20 million in 22, and the rest of the years is $14 million. And any questions on this before I move to the last slide? Okay. If it will, yeah, okay, perfect. So what are the different items that we are evaluating at this point in time for cost reductions? So we did mention that we are talking about an early retirement scheme for DMTRS, but we're also evaluating whether we should have two different schemes, one for DMTRS and one for IPERS covered employees. As we know, the money for the early retirement comes from management fund, and based on the number of positions replaced and the different levels they are in, there is an ongoing savings in a general fund. We'll also be evaluating as part of the budget committee, what are the discontinuation of programs if they do not add to the SMART goals. And I have mentioned to the board that it is going to get increasingly difficult for us to have budget reductions unless we start evaluating these programs. The third item is the health benefits. So we had an understanding with the unions that we will visit this after 2 years. So this is the 2-year span which is coming up. So we want to evaluate and see what kind of reductions we can get to the general fund dollars by changing health benefit plan. We will continue to evaluate staffing in all areas and departments and continue evaluating if there are any opportunities to move costs from general fund to save and petal. Now, we have moved majority of the items from general fund to save and petal, so it's going to get increasingly difficult, and very small dollars we'll be able to find in this particular area. So these are the items that I wanted to highlight at this point in time for cost reductions. And that is the last slide that I have. Any questions, comments?
Shashank, I do have a couple of quick questions. So moving up to the discontinuation of programs if they do not add to the board's SMART goals, I would have to assume that there's going to be some sort of evaluation or matrix that you would use to determine what those programs are and whether or not they would be on the potential for elimination, correct?
Absolutely, Terry.
Okay. And then with regard to the health benefits, is that, I have to assume that that might be a combination of things. Deductibles, I know right now we don't have a copay, but evaluating copay, looking at level of benefit, are all of those things on the table, some of them on the table, or a combination of all?
I would say all of them are on the table, and we have that Health Benefits Advisory Committee. And Kathy, who is the benefits director, continues to meet them, and she has already started discussions with them to come up with some kind of a plan which is going to add to a reduction.
I think that in light of the treatment of treatment of staff report that we had earlier today, being able to do some some comparison of salary and benefits and total package with our competitors would be really important, especially given the fact that we've had higher than usual loss of employees in the 5-year period. So I think that there are so many things that need to be rolled into the evaluation of health benefits that extend beyond just the budgetary implications, because the implications from a teaching and learning perspective are equally important. And I don't know what the sweet spot is for how you balance those two competing demands, but I think that that's a place where, we could be on a really slippery slope one way or the other. So I just think it's really important, especially with regard to that one, that we take into consideration as many variables as possible, get as much employee feedback as possible, analyze the comparative information that we have, because I would be really concerned that any huge shift or change there could be a net negative for us overall. So just a word to the wise on that one. And then my only other thought is, I know that this past year we did a lot of discussion about changes in general fund and shifts to Save and Pebble. And I feel like we not only, got the low hanging fruit, but we got just about everything else that's out there. Is there anything else that we could get that we haven't thought about yet?
And that is what Bill and myself are meeting next week. And we are going to continue to keep evaluating what are the different possibilities. But to your point, yes, as I had mentioned, all the low hanging fruits have been captured, Terry.
Yeah.
So the amounts, I don't expect them to be huge dollar amounts the way we have done it in the past 2 years. That's a fair statement. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, or Tom, do you have any comments to add?
No, I did just want to touch on the early retirement. We're motivated for multiple reasons to look at DMTRS, and we've been talking with both the DMTRS folks, but also the DMEA folks, and trying to determine how two retirement incentives. In fact, this should say retirement incentive, not early retirement, but how our overall staff would receive two concurrent retirement incentives, one for IPERS covered employees and another one for DMTRS. That would be a richer plan that would serve to help level the playing field for retirement for the folks who have been in DMTRS for a number of years. So we were making some headway there, and then when the board was really receptive to the presentation made several months ago, and I think our DMTRS actives really interpreted that as, I think, maybe a little more aggressively than we can actually handle. I think it was Terry, maybe others had mentioned the concern with committing management fund dollars beyond the life of this board, and I think that's a really important consideration. Some of the things that they've proposed are things that wouldn't be legally doable, and two, would put the board in a situation of committing dollars way beyond what really we could safely predict. So we're trying to come up with an idea, and I think we're on to something now of having a basic plan that covers everybody, and then some additional benefit for the DMTRS folks based on years of experience in the district that I think will make a significant difference. So that's the wrinkle to that, though, is the potential of offering two plans concurrently that are actually different based on the retirement plan that the employees are enrolled in. So I know that that's kind of awkward to consider, but I think it may just be the right move, especially this year. So we hope to have something to you, not to share in a meeting, yet this month, of course, but something before the end of this month for your consideration so that we can have a rich discussion about that early in November. And if it meets with your approval, be able to execute that to be effective in FY22.
Okay, board colleagues, did you have any other questions, or Tom, did you have anything else for the board this evening?
No, I do want to just point out that Shashank joined the district in October of last year, correct, Shashank?
That is correct, Tom.
And came to not only public education, but the public sector from many years of very successful experience in the private sector, but he didn't know that he was signing up for maybe the most challenging budget work that any CFO has had to take on, and not to mention that he's had some significant turnover in business and finance due to retirement and some other advancement of individuals there. So I just want to publicly recognize the really outstanding work that Shashank has undergone. He's working on the classes that he's required to take to be an official school business official, but his insight and his acumen has served us very well. And I told him that, if we make it through this one, he'll think every year after this is relatively easy, but he's really stuck with it under extraordinarily challenging circumstances. And we're just really fortunate to have him on the team.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yes, Shashank, thank you. It's a learning work in progress for me on the whole budget thing. So thank you for taking the time this evening to share the information with us. And if there is not anything else, then we will be done with our work session, and enjoy your evening, board colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
See ya.